All right, thank you everybody for joining us here at the First Alert Desk. We're taking a live look. This is East Palestine in Ohio, where if you remember on February 3rd, a train derailed off its tracks, causing a chemical spill. Now we are going to be taking you to a live press conference with the U.S. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg. He will be discussing the NTSB's recently released report, as well as some of his own personal insights. He's been at this site pretty much all morning, just taking it all in and trying to get a better understanding. What I imagine is talking to some people who have been impacted by all of this. So we'll be expecting his remarks here shortly. We were told this press conference would start sharply at 11. We do see there are some delays right now, so we are just waiting momentarily for the Transportation Secretary to begin speaking, and we'll take you straight out to that. And I just wanted to give you a little bit of background about this. This took place just 3 weeks ago, and you think about it, February 3rd, and this small East Palestine community is the site of where this Atlanta-based Norfolk Southern train crashed. Now that's spilling toxic chemicals and raising fears of air and water contamination. Of course, federal response has been issued. We just spoke about the NTSB report that was also released earlier today at, I believe, at around 10 a.m., but criticism, nevertheless, is growing over the pace at which the federal government is responding to this. Some community members and those online, saying it's been 3 weeks and we are now hearing from the Transportation Secretary. But on the federal response side of things, the NTSB, the Environmental Protection Agency, all saying that they are addressing the situation and they are working to coordinate state emergency operations centers and other long-term responses for this rural area. Now, while we do wait for this press conference to begin here shortly, I want to take you through some of our other headlines here in Atlanta as we talk a little bit about what's going on locally here on your Thursday. I want to say Thursday morning still. It's 11:15. We're approaching the noon hour, but morning nevertheless. Starting with this, 3 18-year-olds accused of killing a 15-year-old girl are facing a judge today. That girl has been identified as Madison Guessween. Her mother actually found her unresponsive in her bedroom early Tuesday morning. Now, investigators say that the teen was murdered, and as Atlanta News First Bridget Spencer is going to tell you here in a moment, there's new 911 calls that is shedding a lot of light on what exactly took place. Take a listen.
Up for work and noticed a light on in my daughter's bedroom.
Nancy Finch's life changed forever when she opened her daughter's bedroom door.
Bedroom door was locked. I came through the bedroom door. Her bedroom window is open. The blinds are a mess. She is bleeding from the head.
Finch told 911 her 15-year-old daughter, Madison Guesswin, was lifeless and unresponsive.
Madison, I don't see her breathing. All right, I'm going to go ahead and give you instructions to start CPR, okay?
Seconds later, Finch put her daughter on the floor and starts frantically pumping Madison's chest.
5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Breathing. And Nancy, I need you to keep going, okay?
The 911 operator trying to help Nancy bring her daughter back to life over the phone while officers are en route to the apartment.
4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Peachtree City Police say the injury to Madison's head is consistent with a gunshot wound. Medical examiners still have not ruled the official cause of death, but detectives also confirmed Madison went to Whitewater High School in Fayetteville.
I just want to reiterate that this was not a random act.
Police say these 3 18-year-old men knew Madison.
They knew whose apartment they were at, and it was in some way related to matters between these individuals.
Justice Smith, Jacobian Brown, and Yeshua Mathis were arrested Wednesday. All 3 are now charged with Madison's murder.
Madison.
I'm Tori Cooper, Atlanta News First.
Yeah, that is a story we are going to continue to follow, getting you out to Doraville, talking about this developing and shocking story that has just affected so many, not just in the Doraville community, but really across the metro area. The former Doraville police officer, you might know him as Miles Bryant, now facing a judge today, or expected to, after officially being charged with murder and kidnapping in covering up the death of a teenage girl. Now, police upgraded the charges yesterday. We took you to that live coverage. Those charges against Miles Bryant, naming him as the suspect in Susana Morales' death. We know in her final hours, Morales was visiting a friend at the Sterling Glen Apartments in Norcross, where Bryant lived and worked security detail. Now, around 10 p.m. on July 26, she encountered Bryant and was never seen or heard from again. Police now believe she may have been sexually assaulted, but how and why she died is still unclear. We are following closely with this story. Investigators saying there's no indication that Bryant and Morales knew each other before her disappearance and murder. Bryant's personnel file with Doraville police details a December incident where he was accused of stalking a different woman, but his supervisor concluded at that time that there was no evidence of wrongdoing. And this is just such a scary situation for any parent. Talking about Cobb County. Now, the Cobb County school bus driver was arrested after allegedly entering a student's home without permission. Those parents now speaking out about the unsettling situations. They say they want answers from the school on this bus driver's background, and they're warning other parents about what happened. Chelsea Beimfor explains.
And I'm like, who is this strange man, and did he just enter into my home?
Cassie Sia describes the heart-pounding moment when a stranger entered her home uninvited on Monday afternoon.
I ask him who he is. He just looks at me and he pauses like he was just in shock that we were there.
She says after a few moments of questioning, he identified himself as her 10-year-old daughter's bus driver and then ran out of the home.
Every sick, twisted thought you can think of has gone through my head. Like, who was this man? Why was he here? Did he expect to find my daughter? Who just walks into somebody's house and shuts the door behind them? I've never met this man in my entire life. He's only been the bus driver for about 2 months.
Arrest warrants from the Cobb County Sheriff's Office say Gojini Reyudu is charged with first-degree burglary and loitering after entering the victim's home on Monday. The warrant also states this may have been his third trip to the residence in the last month, according to Sia and neighbors.
Thank God that we were here to intervene, you know, because I don't even want to think what would happen if we hadn't been here.
Now, this mom wants other parents to be on alert for similar situations and make sure they're always looking out for their children.
You know the bus route, but you don't know who's taking home your kids. And that's what's even scarier. And so if anything comes about this is like, we need to know who's taking home our children. I know my kid's never getting on a bus. Like, no way.
Chelsea Beimfor, Atlanta News First.
Yeah, thanking Chelsea for that report. This is another live look here for you. East Palestine in Ohio, where just moments from now we are expecting U.S. Secretary Pete Buttigieg. He's the Transportation Secretary, to be more specific. He will be speaking about his visit this morning to this site that just remains top of mind for so many, not just in this community, but really across the country. We are expecting to hear remarks from him and mention of the NTSB report that was released earlier today into their investigation. Now, before we take you to that, as we are still waiting for this press conference to begin, I did want to note the day that today is here for the Georgia community. Today marks 3 years since the fatal shooting of Ahmad Arbury. As you can remember, he was an unarmed black jogger who was killed while jogging through Brunswick, Georgia. Now, following an encounter with father and son Gregory and Travis McMichael, these men have been convicted of the murder of Arbury in November of 2021, and they were sentenced to life in prison in February of 2022 after a jury found them guilty of federal hate crimes for violating Arbury's civil rights and targeting him because he was black. Now, later today, several state lawmakers will take part in a run in honor of Ahmad Arbury, in honor of his memory. That's happening at the Beltline's West Side entrance at 6 p.m. We wanted to make sure we talked a little bit about that. If you wanted to come show your support again, that is happening at the Beltline's West Side starting at 6 o'clock tonight. All right, let's take you back out to East Palestine, a bit of this train derailment. I want to talk a little bit about the background here in Ohio. This is a live picture. We are just waiting moments from now to hear from the Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg. Now, for those that jumped on this live stream a little late, I want to offer you some of the background and some of what I was discussing just as we started this live stream together. This comes at just 3 weeks after this train derailed off its tracks. This is an Atlanta-based train derailed off its tracks in East Palestine in Ohio, and has the criticism, the concern, the community worries have just grown since then, and I want to get into some of that. So if you recall, on February 3rd, the train derailed, leading to evacuations and heavy concerns of air and water contamination due to a controlled burn of toxic chemicals aimed at preventing an explosion of this site. Now, that has since just blown up both on social media, both in this community. If you've been following this, you might have seen some of the videos just showing the condition of the water. Federal officials responding to all of this, the Biden White House even defending its response amid the criticism they've received, saying that officials from the Environmental Protection Agency, the National Transportation Safety Board, and other agencies are at the rural site within hours of derailment and remain there. The White House saying it's also offered federal assistance, and FEMA has been coordinating with the State Emergency Operations Center and other partners. Now, Buttigieg, Secretary Buttigieg has also received criticism for not visiting the site earlier, including from former President Donald Trump, who came to Ohio just on Wednesday. The Department of Transportation saying Buttigieg is now visiting, which we saw today, and that the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency declared the emergency phase of the crash to be over and the start of long-term cleanup efforts to be underway. So if we can't anticipate what the U.S. Secretary will say, but we can tell you that earlier today the NTSB released its preliminary findings, investigation into this derailment, and we know that the Secretary was touring this site, talking to some of these impacted community members, and just getting that on-the-ground understanding of the situation. So we can expect him to talk a little bit about both of those things, as well as possibly field questions about the ongoing federal response. You know, we talk about this being in its long-term cleanup efforts now heading underway. That becomes really the focus of all of this. Now that we are out of the emergency phase, as the federal government described, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, what does long-term cleanup efforts look like, and what does that look like from state, local, and federal officials? And for those of you just joining us, we are still waiting for moments from now. We are expecting to hear from the U.S. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, who will be discussing this ongoing cleanup efforts and response in Ohio after several trains derailed in this area. I want to give you some additional details of this. It happened on February 3rd after more than 36 freight cars, including 11 carrying hazardous materials, derailed on the East Palestine outskirts. Now that's near the Pennsylvania state line, if that helps you picture where exactly this is. But that prompted an evacuation over concerns of a potential explosion from the wreckage. Now, we have since learned that the response taken was to try to prevent that explosion from happening, and so the government decided to take an initiative and do what is essentially known as a controlled burn of these chemicals, and they burned toxic vinyl chloride from 5 rail cars and sending flames and black smoke high into the sky, leaving a lot of questions about the potential health effects of the surrounding communities of the people in East Palestine. Now, if you've been following some of the social media reaction, just some of the videos that we've seen the chemicals appear in the water, a lot of community concerns about where else they are appearing, possibly if they are appearing in the air. Now, the federal government has said that they are on the ground and addressing the situation and working with state partners and operating centers to help local residents and, of course, surrounding communities. Just recently, the Biden White House saying that their response to the derailment was sound in their eyes. They arrived within hours of the derailment, calling on the Environmental Protection Agency, calling on investigation from the National Transportation Safety Board, and offering federal assistance and FEMA, calling on FEMA to coordinate with the state emergency operations centers as well as other state and local partners. Right now, the focus really turns to what the move is going to be with long-term cleanup efforts, as this community is just still rocked by this situation just 3 weeks later. And while we're monitoring this press conference, waiting for it to begin, again, just moments from now, this press conference was called to start at 11 o'clock this morning. It is now 11:30, so we're really at the mercy of the Transportation Secretary, just waiting for him to approach this podium. You can see several of the media outlets, a lot local, some national, with their mic flags, just waiting for the Transportation Secretary. But I want to take you a little bit out to some of the visuals that we've gotten. This is just after the wreckage, and you can see just the damage left over. This is just the reality for this community, for this village in East Palestine, Ohio. But that is just some pictures I want to take you through, just showing you the scene if you haven't already seen it. I know we have had extensive coverage both on Atlanta News First and AtlantaNewsFirst.com, as well as in our Atlanta News First app, just trying to get you as much information on this as possible and following along. You might remember this is an Atlanta-based train, so we have this connection with the community that is now just dealing with the aftermath of this and really leaning on state, local, and federal officials to help them through it.
See something? Yep. there. See his body man looking out that way. So, see a black SUV that way. He's out of the car.
Hi, buddy. Thanks for coming. Just before taking questions, I want to share a few thoughts from my visit. As you know, the initial stages of the response to this incident are giving way to the longer-term investigation and the safety policy work that we do. I'm here to work and was able to spend time with our personnel here at the derailment site, including our FRA, Federal Rail Administration, PHMSA, the Pipeline and Hazardous Safety Material Administration, who are engaging with NTSB, just to be very clear about this. FRA and PHMSA are part of the U.S. Department of Transportation. NTSB is not. They're independent for very good reason. We respect their independence, but we also work with them to make sure that we're responding to their findings and we're supporting their fact-finding work. I was also able to spend time with a number of federal personnel, including EPA, FEMA, and others who have been doing phenomenal work from day one in order to make sure that this community is supported. That includes, again, not just the presence that our department had from the early hours of this situation, but the presence of public health personnel, environmental personnel, and emergency management response personnel. Spent time with not just federal folks, but state leaders, including Ohio Emergency Management, and local leaders from the county, from the community, council members, and the mayor. Had a good conversation with the mayor, who is clearly very focused on supporting this community and helping the community move forward, as well as other village staff, including village manager, waterworks leader, and the fire chief. And I just have to say that the resilience, the resolve, and the decency of this community, as they have gone through both this disaster's immediate impacts and the swirl of national and international and political attention that's come their way. Their decency and resolve has been inspiring. I also want to make sure to acknowledge something that happened yesterday. A plane crash took the lives of 5 people working for CTEH. That is a firm that has involved in this cleanup. I met with some of their personnel earlier today who are mourning the loss of their friends and colleagues. Some of whom were involved in this response as they were on their way to another. And NTSB is involved in the immediate response to that crash. But my heart goes out to the people who are already in a very stressful situation here and are now having this added pain and facing it in a way that again is inspiring. I also spoke today with the chair of the NTSB, Jennifer Ahmad. As you know, they have released their initial factual report. Their final work on this will take a while to come out. But having these factual findings is an important step toward being able to move on to the phase of policy. And while we will, of course, wait for their analysis and recommendations at the end of the full process to make certain judgments, we will not wait for that process to run its course. Continue doing everything that we can to raise the bar on rail safety and to hold people accountable. And that's the other part of what my visit here is about. To make sure that we can assess how to drive the best safety improvements across our national transportation system. And to any national political figure who has decided to get involved and would like to use Palestine, I have a simple message, which is I need your help, because if you're serious about this, there is more that we can do to prevent more communities from going through this. We've laid out a set of actions for DOT to take, some of which were already underway, others which we're adding to the agenda. A set of things that the railroad industry needs to do, including better informing communities when hazmat is coming to them, something I've talked to the governor about and strongly agree with him, and including steps to take care of their workers and their system, and things that we need Congress to work. And again, anyone in Congress who cares about these issues, they are welcome to come to the table and work with us to get things done. So anybody who is interested in that, I'm going to hold them to that. But we're also holding ourselves to the highest standard in terms of the work that we're doing and the work that we're continuing to do to both respond to this incident and to make sure that we make rail safer for everyone who lives in a community that is close to rail lines and anybody who is involved in the freight rail and all of that.
Sir, there's a lot of trauma in this. There's a lot of trauma in this community, a lot of emotion, and as you noted, a lot of politics too. Now that you've seen the records and spoken to the people, was it a mistake not to come here sooner?
Yeah, what I tried to do was balance two things. My desire to be involved and engaged and on the ground, which is how I am generally wired to act, and my desire to follow the norm of transportation secretaries, allowing NTSB to really lead the initial stages of the public-facing work. I'll do some thinking about whether I got that balance right. But I think the most important thing is, first of all, making sure that the residents here have what they need. Something that from our piece of the puzzle, DOT, we were working on from day one. And making sure we do something for the future. We can talk about process, and that's perfectly fair. But I don't want people pointing to process as a way to get away from the fundamental question of rail safety regulation and accountability, and whether we're going to make it tougher or whether we're going to allow it to continue being watered down.
And sir, if I may ask, now that you have been, thank you. Now that you have been here on the ground, have you had an opportunity to speak to residents here since you've been on the ground? And just to follow up, since you have had some time to now think about it, in retrospect, should you have come a little sooner?
So again, in terms of the timing of the visit, I'm trying to strike the right balance, allowing NTSB to play its role, but making sure we're here in that show of support. But in terms of the residents, which is what this is really about, the really striking thing to me is how they're here for each other. This is not a community with infinite resources. Speaking with the mayor, hearing about what he has been through, and remembering the experience of being the mayor, I am really impressed with how they've been able to support people. And they're not here for the politics. They're here to make sure this community can move forward.
But other than the mayor, sir, have you spoken to any other residents?
Yeah, I spoke with community, two members of the council. I spoke with a lot of community residents who were involved in their capacities responding to these. And all of them, I just really admire their decency as well as...
Secretary, what are you telling these residents who are concerned about their livelihood?
First of all, I want them to know they're not alone. That before, during, and after the national event, they're going to have support. They're going to have support from us when it comes to holding Norfolk Southern accountable. They're going to have support from the EPA when it comes to making sure they get accurate information about the safety of their air, water, and soil. And I think they can have support, they ought to have support from the whole country that has seen what they've been through, above and beyond the kind of legalities of it. The important is to make sure that they're taken care of.
Secretary, regulations so that trains will be experiencing what kind of fluoride will have to register high hazard chemicals.
I think that is something that we need to look at. Look, this category. Let me be clear about one thing. These trains were regulated as hazardous material, but they were not in that higher category called high hazard flammable train. That's a category that was created mainly with crude oil in mind, and it was largely a response to the derailment that killed 47 people in Canada in the early part of the last decade. I understand why there's something particularly dangerous about certain kinds of flammable liquid like crude oil. But I think just at a common sense level, you ask yourself, if there's a category called high hazard flammable train, and this train that led to that toxic cloud and that consequence for this community wasn't in it, what's going on there? And so it's one of many things that we're looking at with the authorities we have, but also want to work with Congress. And also, you know, that 2015 rule that's getting a lot of attention around ECP brakes wouldn't have applied to a non-high hazard flammable train. But I think we got to ask, what other trains should that have applied to in the first place? And can Congress untie our hands a little bit in terms of the hoops we've got to go through to try to raise the bar on those braking rules? Because Congress pushed it in the opposite way, just like the tank cars. I mean, when you see the twisted metal there, you realize the difference between a fortified tank car and some of the tank cars that don't have that level of fortification. The target date for getting that done, changing some of the tank cars, was 2025. It got pushed out, watered down to 2029. Again, I am being careful not to weigh in on what tank car fortifications might have made a difference here, because NTSB is doing that work. But I'm just saying, in general, hazardous materials could be going through communities in stronger tank cars. Let's speed that up. So I'm calling on the railroads not to wait on us making them, and the companies that they work with to require that, but also Congress to help push that date back up.
Before you send your first tweet expressing concern for the residents of East Palestine, a week and a half after the accident happened, in hindsight, was that waiting too long to express anything hours after you had addressed the makeup of work crews on highway construction projects just that very day?
The answer to your question is yes. I felt strongly about this and could have expressed that sooner. Again, I was taking pains to respect the role that I have and the role that I don't have, but that should not have stopped me from weighing in about how I felt about what was happening in this community.
The third hot bearing detector was at 253 degrees before. The third hot bearing detector was at 253 degrees before critical failure was alerted. Did the crews do what they were supposed to do? Was the equipment that was used by Norfolk Southern the right equipment for the job? And, I mean, more importantly, could this have been prevented?
Right. So part of that I really have to let NTSB speak to. And by the way, I think they have an availability at 1 o'clock where they'll go into more detail. But what I will say is those hot box detectors represent an example of a piece of safety equipment that right now is not required by regulation. And so there are differences from railroad to railroad, from company to company, in terms of how they're used. I think that's another example of something that needs to be looked at to try to prevent things like this from happening.
Secretary, you took common sense steps the other day.
Yep.
This morning I heard you talking with the officials down at the train derailment site, and they mentioned that the placards that said high hazardous materials were plastic and burned right away. For future responses to things like this, and first responders acting quickly, they don't know what's in those train cars. You mentioned common sense earlier. What moves forward, and what did you learn that you could implement going forward?
That's right. That's one of the reasons I'm glad I was able to see this site directly. The moment you see the twisted metal in those tank cars, you understand how a placard indicating the hazardous material on board will not survive for more than a second in the kind of heat that this site created. It's one of the reasons why we called for railroad companies to proactively share more information on the hazardous materials on their trains moving through communities. That goes through a piece of software called Ask Rail. I think we need to raise the bar on what's expected and on what's required. But I think the railroad industry should be doing more out of the gate. Let me mention one other thing. We fund first responders. As a matter of fact, through some of our programming, about 4,000 first responders in Ohio alone have been through the training on hazardous material. I think another thing we can do is continue to increase access so that we know they have access to that Ask Rail app and the funding they need, the training they need, as well as pushing the railroad companies to use it proactively to keep their
What federal resources can the residents of East Palestine and this area of Ohio expect going forward? I know it's on the but as federal resources,
So first of all, my colleague Michael Regan has made it very clear that Norfolk Southern will pay for this remediation. And the federal administration will be here to hold them accountable for that and make sure that they are making this community whole. Other federal resources include the presence of emergency management personnel, public health personnel. Let me mention one other thing that I saw state public health personnel doing in concert with the county and local leaders, which is making sure that they address the mental as well as the physical health effects of this. So obviously you've got a community that has been through something even as the air clears, even if the soil and water and air are continuing to be tested and shown to be clean, that's still going to affect their health in a different way. And I applaud everybody who was paying attention.
Secretary, follow up. When it comes to having the Norfolk Southern be responsible for the challenges, obviously you mentioned there's the health that is needed, but as problems reveal themselves throughout the years, throughout the decades of that nation, how would you make sure that you actually do something about it?
Well, that's just why we need to, it's a great example of why we need to make sure we have the strongest, toughest possible hand when it comes to dealing with these railroad companies. And to me, it's both specific to this location, which is that as long as Norfolk Southern is running trains on this track, and as long as anybody is feeling the impacts of this disaster, Norfolk Southern has to be there. Not just this year, not just when all the press are here, but every single day. But also, Norfolk Southern and the other freight rail companies need to stop fighting us every time we try to do a regulation in order to hold them accountable and their other railroad companies accountable for their safety record. And what we've seen is industry goes to Washington and they get their way. They got their way on the ECP bill. They got their way on a Christmas tree of regulatory changes that the last administration made on its way out the door in December of 2020. I think they're getting their way on the fines being too low. Sorry, but if the biggest fine we can charge on a violation is $250,000 or less, and that's an egregious half-time violation to get somebody killed, it's not enough for a multi-billion-dollar company.
So what do you do about all that, sir?
Well, we're acting on it with the authorities we have and calling on members of Congress to act on it with the authorities they have. And the railroads not to wait on us to require them to do the right thing on their Well, I will say this. If you talk to the unions representing workers in the rail industry, number one thing they talk about when I'm with them, before they even get to wages and benefits, is safety. And they have weighed in on safety. Matter of fact, again, if you look at the record and comb through the fine print on the December 2020 rulemaking, under the last administration, there's a whole bunch of comments from labor on why they were concerned from a safety perspective, and then all of the rationale for why their concerns were overruled. We know that, for example, and this is one of the biggest things we're working on, we know that one safety issue is how many people are on a train. This one had 3 people on it, a trainee and 2 others, according to the NTSB report. And that's actually more than you sometimes get on a mile-long train. The railroad companies want to be able to take it down to 1. One thing that workers have told us, unions have told us, and that we feel strongly about, is there needs to be an actual regulation on this. It was in the works. The last administration froze it. From the moment we got here, we've been resuming the work on advancing that regulation because it's an example of something that workers have been asking about that bears on safety. Again, I will state of NTSB's business on whether crewing and staffing, how that might have related to this case. Too early for me to go around making judgments on that. But we know that if you've got a train that's a mile long and something goes wrong halfway down it, and you got 1 guy on there, that's going to be a problem. Could Norfolk have used better equipment?
Issue of trust.
So this is reporting from ProPublica that Norfolk Southern has a policy that allows them to ignore certain safety alerts from the trash. Is that standard in the rail industry, and are you concerned about that?
So this is where we've got to make sure that we have enough teeth in our regulations. Some of the things with the hot box detectors are not prescribed in the letter of the law. They're up to the railroad to decide. And I think we need to look at two things. One, did the railroad make the right decisions? That's part of the safety investigation. And then two, should we lay out a little more clearly what those decisions should be so it's not up? And that's the regulatory part.
Sure, the issue of trust. I read the entire book about trust. Mistrust has been considered this. How can you bring that back and far out of that sense? Secondly, what if your past political ambitions, how have they played into the Republican response to this attack?
Look, again, I'm here for the work and not for the politics. You can sense when you talk to local leaders and local residents that they're getting pretty sick of the politics too. And this national ideological layer that's been added into all of this when they're just trying to figure out if they're going to be safe. And there's no question that there have been enormous amounts of both information and misinformation injected into this situation, none of which is to the benefit of the community when it comes to that misinformation.
Did Norfolk
So I think, so I lost my train of thought. That's what I had to say about that. I guess one other thing. If the same people who want to come here and play political games are the same people who sided with industry again and again and again and watered down rail regulations again and again and again, I want to see where they've had an actual change of heart or not. And if they had a change of heart, I'll take them at their word and we can get work done.
Yeah. What assurances can you give the people of East Palestine you're going to hold Norfolk Southern to fire, and then when all the news cameras are gone, all the politicians are left, they will actually be safe, that we'll have the town back the way it was?
That's exactly why we're here. That's why we've been here from the first hours of the incident as an administration. And it's why our interest both in what happened here in East Palestine and in keeping our railroads safe doesn't go away when some other hot news story comes into the headlines. We're going to be here day in, day out, year in, year out, making our railroads safer and making sure Norfolk Southern meets its responsibilities. That is a promise and one I take very, very seriously.
Mr. Secretary, on the date of the assembly, what's your assessment of the cleanup effort thus far and also Norfolk Southern's role?
So you can see how hard people are working to clean up this site. And again, I met with some of the folks involved in that on everything from testing to the remediation. And they are doing good work. They need to be supported. If at any moment we see any evidence that Norfolk Southern is backsliding on their commitments or that anybody is not doing this by the book and then some, we're going to be there with any authorities that we have on the matter and this whole administration because this is too important to let people know. So I want to make sure get people who haven't asked before. Sorry. Yeah. Well, one thing he could do is express support for reversing the deregulation that happened on his watch. I heard him say he had nothing to do with it, even though it was in his administration. So if he had nothing to do with it, and they did it in his administration against his will, maybe he could come out and say that he supports us moving in a different direction. We're not afraid to own our policies when it comes to raising the bar on regulation. And I've got to think that him indicating that this is something that everybody, no matter how much you disagree on politics and presidential campaigns, can get behind. Higher fines, tougher regulations on safety, Congress untying our hands on braking rules, all the other things that go with that, that'd be a nice thing for him to do.
What will be the right to put the companies from stopping to cut corners when it comes to safety? But obviously, one of their biggest issues is the sheer number of in-person safety workers.
Yep, that's right.
They pointed to how in trainings like this, there needs to be like a number of safety workers.
That's right.
Go through an in-person inspect, train before they. How do you get company up stopping cutting like large pieces of safety?
Look, the reality is this is their entire business model. In the last few years, they have gone into a business model that is about cutting and cutting and cutting and cutting. And what has happened is it's a concern from a safety perspective. It has not made them more effective in delivering freight. We know that from our supply chain issues that we've seen. It has made them wildly profitable. So profitable that in my view they could meet a much higher safety standard and still be profitable. And that's what really needs to happen next. So, the reality is, if their business model is telling them to cut, whether it's cutting corners or cutting people, the only real wall we can put up against that is regulation. And I know the word regulation is not popular with some people, but we need enforcement, we need accountability, and that starts with making sure we have enough teeth in our regulations to actually see to it that happens.
Secretary, for 2 years now, how long can you continue blaming the Trump administration for derailment in Jefferson County, the county south this year back in November?
Yep.
It was only carrying trash that took Norfolk Southern a month to clean that up. What would you and the department you oversee do to continue to make sure this cleanup is done properly, but in that quicker process?
Yeah, look, I'm here focused on East Palestine, but there have been a number of incidents, derailments, and crashes that need attention, and it gives you, if you look at the statistics, you get a sense of what we're up against. And specifically with Norfolk Southern, they need to lead the way in going above and beyond, especially after what happened here. They should have been doing it anyway, and some of their remediation responsibilities obviously is more on the EPA side, and I'd have to look to them in terms of what they can require. But what we're going to require is that they meet the highest standard on safety.
Just to follow up on that quickly, in any of your briefings today, concerning residents in our community as well as here is where that contaminated soil may go.
That's right.
Discussion on exactly where that soil may go.
Yeah, one of the things that I've seen that the environmental folks on the ground here, both the state and EPA, are very focused on is, not just getting through the next day or 2 days, but what happens as water moves through the soil, what happens as soil moves through the area, and what happens to the soil that's being removed. I don't have all of the details on that, but folks are right to be concerned.
And Mr. Secretary,
yeah.
we're talking about regulation, regulatory changes, fine changes. These are things that are political to take months to take place or to change. Anytime these trains are going from other communities in other states all over the country, is there anything that the Department of Transportation, the federal government, can do immediately, urgently, to maybe make things safer?
Yeah, one thing I've ordered FRA to do is stepped up inspection program, what we call focused inspections on any of the routes that are of particular concern, either because of the nature of the cargo that's traveling there or because of some other community risk. They do a good job to begin with, but what we can do immediately is a level of elevated focused inspection based on what we've learned from this situation. Because you're exactly right. These regulatory processes can take forever. Something that railroad companies have taken advantage of, by the way, sometimes waiting out one administration to see if a more industry-friendly administration will come in and kill them. We're going to work as fast as we can on the regulatory side. We're not waiting for that. We're not waiting for an act of Congress. We're not waiting for a law to change. To do the things that we can do with the powers that we do have.
How many freight trains does that affect? What would you say to some of the residents here who feel as though they're worried about what happens 5 years from now, 10 years from now? They see folks like you coming down here, giving speeches. The concern is who will be here to watch out for them in the long term? What would you say to those people?
Well, they're right to be concerned. With some of these issues, health issues, environmental issues, they can last for years. They can last for decades. And there's really just two things I can say. First of all, we will never forget the people of East Palestine. We will support them with everything we've got. But second, the best way to deal with an ecological disaster is to stop it from happening in the first place. And that's a big part of where my department comes in. And we take that very seriously. It's why we've laid out all those sets of things we're doing, things we want Congress to do, things we expect the railroads to do about that.
And Mr. Secretary, on contaminated soil.
Say again?
Probably
better to direct you to EPA for the details on that, but what I will say is my understanding is what you have here is what was needed in order to restore the supply chain and get things moving, but is not the long-term solution in terms of that. And obviously the contamination of the soil will be an issue.
Mr. Secretary, there are better cars to transport these hazardous materials, and even talking about some of these being phased out to the Norfolk Southern. Do they own these
cars, could they have had better transport vehicles to carry these?
Well, certainly I would urge Norfolk Southern and any other railroad to radically accelerate the adoption of these tank cars. It is a little complex. Often the tank cars are owned not by the railroad, but by the chemical company. But the railroad can require that of the chemical company. And we're looking into what we can require of the chemical company sooner, now that Congress kind of watered down the adoption date. So I guess what I'm saying is a both and, right? I think the railroad ought to require this right now, but we're going to make sure we require it on the legal side too.
And of all that, you believe that they used the best equipment that they could have used to haul these chemicals?
I won't weigh in on that until the NTSB has done their work. I think there's more analysis to be done there.
Secretary, talk about what stopped you from 2 years that you've been in office from revisiting these people, or for that matter, finding the high hazard.
Well, the top priority we've had on the regulatory side has been this staffing rule. We can't do everything all at once and realize that we would have to sequence the kinds of regulatory actions we take. And the one we were hearing the most about, especially from workers in the railroad industry, is this two-person crew rule. The other thing that makes it hard on the ECP rule is that Congress, remember, it didn't just get killed with a clean shot, so to speak. Congress basically moved the goalposts on the benefit cost analysis to make it very difficult to keep this rule on the books. And then the last administration went ahead and took it down. So I am asking my staff to conduct a stepped-up analysis on anything we may have missed, any angle that we weren't looking at, or anything that, for example, in a benefit cost analysis, might actually change now that we have the data, some of the data from this incident, that would empower us. But look, the cleaner way to do that would be for Congress to untie our hands, so that we didn't have to go through all those hoops to begin with.
Sir, you said there were three crew members on the train, including a trainee. You said there were three crew members on the train, including a trainee. Is there any way that can be safe?
So again, NTSB should speak to some of what happened in particular in terms of the folks on board. But this is why I'm so frustrated that it's taken so much of our energy and political capital just to hold the line on there being two. I mean, the railroad industry wants to be able to have one person on trains that can be a mile long or long. One. And there was movement to do something about that. Last administration froze it. We are, before this incident, and now we're still doing it, trying to bring that back.
So how big a problem is this crew staffing issue?
I think it's a real issue. And again, especially given the overall business model we've seen from the railroads, which is to cut and cut and cut, including cutting safety jobs, cutting maintenance jobs. The jobs on board are a little more tightly regulated, but if they could, I'm worried that they would.
So can we jump in? You guys only have about another minute. I want to get to somebody who hasn't asked a question yet. Anyone who has not asked a question. Go in the back of the green, please.
So how does this community recover, and how does the federal government do that, or help them do that when no one wants to come here? Now there's going to be environmental disaster, all of that once they lose their money. Who's going to help the businesses, and what's going to be done to help people that live right along the tracks?
So this is a community that, first of all, it's a community full of good people who did nothing wrong. No one in this community asked to be in this situation. And they deserve not just the full force of the federal administration and the state government being there for them, not just Norfolk Southern doing the right thing and paying for the cleanup. They deserve a different level of support, a human level of support. The country should be wrapping their arms around the people of East Palestine, not as a political football, not as an ideological flashpoint, not as a gotcha moment, but as thousands of human beings whose lives got upended through no fault of their own. And I think that includes visits, not just big official visits from the government, but just people who've seen the news and whose hearts go out to the community here and can come here on a day like this when the sun is shining, or on a rainy day, shop in those shops and visit those businesses. It is safe to visit here, as all of us can attest, even while we're still making sure that it stays safe to live here. And people deserve that.
Mr. Secretary, Norfolk Southern created a website in the wake of the train derailment. One of the FAQ sections, they asked OSHA residents to use it for long-term health events, and they said no, based on the monitoring data, they shouldn't. Do you think this is their way of minimizing liability?
I know they've got a lot of lawyers. I wouldn't speculate on their legal strategy. What I would say is they need to go way, way beyond the legal minimum here. And they need to lead the railroad industry, shifting its posture, to stop fighting us tooth and nail every time we try to use the tools that we have as an administration to make freight rail safe.
Last question goes to Sir in the please, and that's it.
Secretary, the Department of Transportation is expected to have a ruling in March on LNG transport by rail. Has that decision been made yet? Do you worry that transporting LNG by rail cars could lead to an even bigger disaster than this?
So I'm not ready to get ahead of a finalized rule or announcement there. What I will say is that this situation calls on us to re-examine everything that's been underway related to those issues. Now, what we found as we first looked at that LNG rule was that class of rail movement was unlikely, at least in the short term, to happen anyway. Nobody was seeking to use those kinds of cars. But we're setting policy for the long run. We've got to make sure we get it right. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, Secretary. Yeah, it does hurt out.